Good morning and happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day at Phillips Academy. Thank you so much to the Gospel Choir for starting us off in such a spectacular fashion. You are amazing, and my heart goes out to you. Thank you. And thank you in particular to LCG and everyone who has planned this day. There will be chances for many more thank yous, but this is already a triumph, and thank you for the amazing leadership. By way of welcome, I wanted to say two things, and one of them I hope is straightforward, and the other is a little bit more complicated. The straightforward thing is just a straight celebration, a straight sense of happiness about what we're able to explore and to celebrate today. This holiday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, is one that we as a community embrace like we embrace no other day. There is no other day on which we gather here as a community, as adults and students, and I have to say I love seeing the adults lining the back. It's not always the case at all school meeting that I see adults lining the back of the room, so thank you. That we see so many guests who have come here to celebrate with us, and that we devote the rest of the day not to traditional classes, but to a set of programs that help us to celebrate and explore the complicated issues related to diversity and multiculturalism that are at the core of our fabric. So thank you for that, and thank you for embracing the day. But I wanted, as a second point, to point out something somewhat more complicated. And I want to use a quote from Dr. King. There are so many great quotes from Dr. King, it's hard to choose. But as a starting point for that, one of the many wonderful things he said, and I hope we'll explore other things he said too, was, "I believe that what self-centered men have torn down, other centered men can build up." Of course, we take out that word men that is meant in the colloquial sense and replace it in a non-gender specific way. But let's think seriously about what it means without that particular distraction. On a simple level, it's a wonderful statement of non-sibi, of course, not for self at the core of our motto. It's a wonderful statement that helps us think about what Youth from Every Quarter means here. And it's a wonderful statement, I think, of challenge to each of us to think about what we can do as other-centered people, and what, frankly, do we want to build up? That's the challenge ahead of us. And here's the uncomfortable part. I had a wonderful breakfast this morning with Biz Gormley, an alum from the class of 2000. Where are you, Biz? Who helped me to see, there she is, thank you, who's back to help us with one of the segments this afternoon. And she encouraged me to encourage all of you to embrace the discomfort, not just the comfort of this day. And I want to tell you a very short personal story about my family, which to me is the discomfort that I face as I think about and walk into the chapel this morning. The discomfort is that I am descended from a slaveholder. Let me say that again. I am a descendant of a slaveholder. I suspect that many of us have stories in our lives or families that give us discomfort, as this one does to me. And I think that today is a day in which we can think about our own families and our own legacies and figure about what kind of a life we want to live as other-centered people. So here's the story in my own family. I suspect many of you look at me and think this is a classic white male, classic WASP from New England. All of that is true. You might imagine that one of my forebears came across on one of those early boats, and he did, Peter Palfrey. He settled near Salem, is featured in many of the Hawthorne short stories of that era. He was a no-fun Puritan from those stories, if they are true. He had a series of offspring and so forth, around the time of the Revolution, he had a son named William Palfrey, or there was a descendant named William Palfrey. This is all in my direct line. And William Palfrey turned out to be memorialized in Christ Church in Cambridge. There's a plaque to him, and it says, "William Palfrey," and the quote is, "brave, good man." I think of that all the time. I wish to be a brave, good man. He was an aide-de-camp in the Revolution to General Washington and served in the spirit of those revolutionaries for lots of good things, particularly religious freedom, of course, at the time, and the Declaration and so forth. He was appointed to be the first ambassador at the time, Consul General to France. He He got on a boat and he started off for France, and he never came back. That boat was lost at sea. But he had a son, and his son was named John Palfrey. This particular John Palfrey, at the end of the 18th century, decided to be a merchant and wasn't, as it turned out, especially good at it by all accounts. And in his struggle to do this, he had a bunch of kids, and my family, with a few exceptions, it's almost all academics all the way along, so we never had very much money, but we always had this kind of high-minded spirit, but there were occasionally a few failed merchants along the way, and he was one of them. And in his attempt to make a bunch of money, he left Boston, where he was struggling. He left his one kid behind, and he went to Louisiana, where he invested in a plantation. So he was the slaveholder in the story. Turns out that his son, the one who stayed behind, was named John Gorham Palfrey. It is also from him that I am descended. And John Gorham Palfrey was an enterprising young guy, and at age 13, he found himself at the Phillips Exeter Academy as a charity student. So I am descended also from a financial aid student early on in the Phillips Academy story, although the Phillips Exeter Academy story. 2 years later, he went to Harvard College also as a charity student. He studied divinity, became the first dean of Harvard Divinity School. He ran for the Congress as an abolitionist and won one term. His father and his brothers were in Louisiana running this plantation. When his father died, John Gorham Palfrey inherited slaves. The brothers continued, I believe, to run the plantation, and when John Gorham Palfrey had them, he freed those slaves. That was his act. He didn't wish to own them and devoted his life to that particular bit of service. So why do I tell you this story, other than to bare my soul this morning and the discomfort that I feel in celebrating this day? It's actually to encourage each of you, each of us, to think about it. So I suspect in this room we have the full complement of people who have family histories. I suspect there are descendants of American slaves here. I think that's a fairly safe bet. I suspect there are descendants of both American slaves and slaveholders. I suspect, if history holds true. I suspect that there are many of us who have family who fought on both sides of the Civil War. But it's not only about the race in America story that we meet and discuss today. I suspect, regardless of where you come from in the world, that there are stories in your family background that have some bearing on this. We have one of the people who fought to end apartheid in South Africa. I'm looking at my friend Themba Makubela. If you do not know Mr. Makubela's story, you must learn it. That's your homework for today. It is extraordinary. Bless you. Miracle. But I suspect that if you are one of the 25% of our population who comes from an Asian background or an Asian American background, that you have your own stories of this sort. And regardless of the 30 countries you come from, you have your own valence on this story about the cultural and multicultural complexity. Where I want to leave us is think about this quote again. I believe that what self-centered men have torn down, other-centered men can build up. I want to encourage you to be self-centered before you are other-centered, to think about what the legacy of Dr. King means for you, regardless of where you start today, regardless of whether you bear on your shoulders the shame of being related to a slaveholder or not, or the pride of being related to a freedom fighter or not, and think about what does it mean right now to be an other-centered person. And as we do these workshops this afternoon, please lean into them no matter who you are. Biz and I, we were joking that we are probably the whitest of the white people you will ever meet, and it's true. Sorry, Biz, to out you in that way, but it's helpful to me to have a female companion in this particular discussion. But I urge you not to let any feelings you have at the beginning of the day get in the way of exploring the complexity and exploring the discomfort as well as the joy and the celebration. And ask yourself, what does it mean today to be an other-centered person working on carrying out the legacy of Dr. King, no matter who you are and no matter where you come from, and recognizing right now at this place, even though Andover may be the most diverse place you ever live, and the place that truly embraces diversity in all its aspects and multiculturalism in all its aspects, and I promise you there's a high likelihood that this is true, that this may be the place that does it best, we do not do it right yet. This is a work in progress. And every single one of us in this room, kid or adult, regardless of whether you have the stripes of being a freedom fighter or not already, there's something that we can do as other-centered people, and that's our job today. So thank you.